Hello. Today in our lecture, we shall talk about the classical sociologist Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer was a sociologist in the 19th century positivist tradition, and his primary concerns were with the tracing of evolutionary changes in social structure and social institutions. Spencer defined evolution as a change from a state of relatively indefinite, incoherent homogeneity to a state of relatively definite, coherent heterogeneity. Spencer believed that this law of evolution was a universal process. It was a law because it was applicable to the entire universe. Whether we look at the universe in terms of its organic or inorganic, or the social or the non-social aspects. Spencer therefore argued that all things natural or social were subject to these universal natural laws. We can thus see that the basic element of early 19th century positivism, that is, the world social, was as much governed by the laws of nature as was the world of nature itself, is very preeminent. Spencer underscored that the claims of sociology to be a natural science of society would never be fulfilled unless it can be based on the idea of a natural evolutionary law, that the laws applicable to the world of nature was also definitely applicable to the world of the social. Having been trained originally as a biologist, Spencer's sociology focuses on the parallels between organic and social evolution. Organic analogies are therefore privileged by Spencer. Spencer pointed out that social units and groups, just like the organic ones do, they develop from relatively undifferentiated states in which the parts resemble one another into differentiated states in which these parts become more dissimilar. Once parts have become unlike, what happens? They are mutually dependent on each other. Thus, with growing differentiation comes growing interdependence and hence better integration. We are going to focus primarily here on the types of societies that Spencer discussed following his evolutionary laws, and particularly something that he is also known for, social Darwinism, the philosophy of social Darwinism that he propounded. We know that Spencer talks about how structures differentiate, become complex, and on the basis of this differentiation and complexity, Spencer discussed societies from simple to compound societies. But Spencer was also very much concerned with distinguishing social types, particularly on the basis of internal regulation within societies. This understanding, this philosophical preference emerged from his own individualism, and therefore internal regulation and the nature of that internal regulation also determined the type of society a particular formation, social formation, was taking. Accordingly, he distinguished between two types of societies or social formations. One was a militant society and the other was industrial society. Mind you, here we are looking at this distinction on the basis of the distinctive type of internal regulations each of these societies had. So, what are the characteristics of a militant society in terms of its dominant function or activity? Spencer argues that the dominant function or activity of militant society is the corporate defensive and offensive activity for preservation and aggrandizement. For industrial society, this very function or activity that is dominant is very different. It is peaceful mutual rendering of individual services. If we move to the second characteristic that Spencer underlines, in terms of the principle of social coordination, militant society demonstrates compulsory cooperation, regimentation by enforcement of orders, both positive and negative regulation of activity. In industrial society, this principle of social coordination is voluntary cooperation, regulation by contract, not by enforcement of orders, by contract and principles of justice, and only regulation will happen in terms of a negative regulation of activity. What is the relation between the individual and the state? In militant societies, individuals exist for the benefit of state. There are restraints on liberty, property and mobility, whereas in industrial society, the state exists for the benefit of individuals. Freedom is very demonstrably evident, and there are few restraints on property and mobility. The relations between the state and other organizations also similarly differ between militant and industrial societies. All organizations are public in militant societies. Private organizations are effectively excluded. However, in industrial society, private organizations are encouraged. The structure of the state in militant society is centralized, whereas in industrial society it is decentralized. The structure of social stratification is more ascribed in militant societies. There is fixity of rank, there is fixity of occupation and locality, and the inheritance of positions. In industrial society, the structure of social stratification is more open and based on achievement. That is, there is plasticity and openness of rank, occupation and locality, and there is movement between positions. That is, the ranks and the positions are not fixed in perpetuity, but there can be a mobility between these. The type of economic activity in militant society is marked by economic autonomy and self-sufficiency. There is little external trade, and protectionism is a principle of militant society. But loss of economic autonomy, interdependence via peaceful trade, and free trade are the characteristics of industrial societies. Patriotism, courage, reverence, loyalty, obedience, faith in authority and discipline mark the valued social and personal characteristics in militant societies. But in industrial societies, independence, respect for others, resistance to coercion, individual initiative, truthfulness and kindness are the principles. After this, we move on to another aspect for which, as I said, Spencer is very well known, that is of social Darwinism. Spencer believed that, like nature, the social organism also develops following natural selection and the principle of the survival of the fittest. Like evolution in nature, we have the process of natural selection whereby the unfit elements are eliminated in a very natural way. Society also demonstrates that. Both Spencer and Comte, another positivist thinker and who is credited to be the first founder of the discipline, believed that the operation of social laws were deterministic and governing in nature. So, the social laws that govern the society are as deterministic as the laws that govern the natural world. There is no alternative. So, he says either society has laws or it has not. If it has not, there can be no order, no certainty, no system in its phenomena. If it has, then they are like the other laws of the universe, sure, inflexible, ever active, and having no exception. However, as we know, Comte had stressed that humans should aim at discovering the laws of society in order to act collectively in the social world for the betterment of the human condition, of course, within the confines of the law. Herbert Spencer argued emphatically and with conviction that we should study them in order not to act collectively. So, following this, Spencer argues passionately that sociologists should convince the public that society must be free from the meddling of governments and reformers. He pointed out that society, that government is the best government which interferes the least. Spencer argues that once you begin to interfere with the order of nature, there is no knowing where the result will end. Going back to Spencer's main contention that the world of the social is not that different from the world of nature as far as the laws of nature applicable to the world of the social is concerned. We can understand how this will have an impact on the social order. He argues that given the complexity of causes operating in society and the fact that human actions are likely to result in consequences that cannot be anticipated, Spencer urges us to let things be left alone. So, what is the role of the state then, which we have just identified in industrial society in terms of its merely regulation? Spencer grants the state some space, saying that the state was to protect the rights of the individual and it was to collectively protect against outside enemies. According to him, the state had the duty not only of shielding each citizen from the trespasses of his neighbors, but of defending him in common with the community at large against foreign aggression. Everything else was to be left to the free initiative of individuals making contracts and agreements with one another. If these contracts and agreements are broken, only the state can step in then, merely as a regulatory instrument. A good society, therefore, in Spencer's view, is based on contracts between individuals pursuing their respective interests. Whenever the state intervenes in these contractual arrangements, whether for reasons of social welfare or any other, it either distorts the social order or leads to a retrogression from the benefits of industrial society to early forms of tyrannical and militant social order. Spencer's extremely anti-collectivist views, as Koser says, can be traced to a number of extra scientific influences, but it is also grounded in the doctrine of the survival of the fittest, which, like Charles Darwin, he had derived from Malthus. Spencer argued in terms of the theory of population, deviating a little bit from Malthus here, that an excess of fertility stimulates greater activity because the more people there are, the more ingenuity is required to stay alive. The least intelligent groups and individuals die off. Hence, the general level of intelligence is bound to rise gradually. We can see here again how his theory of population is connected with the social Darwinistic principles. Quote from Spencer, "Those whom this increasing difficulty of getting a living, which excess of fertility entails, does not stimulate to improvements in production, that is, to greater mental activity, are on the high road to extinction and must ultimately be supplanted by those whom the pressure does so to stimulate." Spencer argued that the general level of intelligence will rise to the extent that only those with superior intelligence survive in the battle for existence. But this evolutionary mechanism will be fatally upset, he argued, once governmental intervention is allowed to distort the beneficial processes of natural selection. Spencer was vehemently against governmental intervention in the form of social welfare measures like the Poor Laws in England. He argued then the natural balance that the society gets by following the processes of natural selection and of non-intervention by the state will then be upset, and therefore, we are going to lose the benefits of this natural process. We quote from Spencer, as we find it in Koser's book, "The rigorous necessity, which when allowed to operate becomes so sharp a spur to the lazy and so strong a bridle to the random, these paupers' friends would repeal, blind to the fact that under the natural order of things, society is constantly excreting its unhealthy, imbecile, slow, vacillating, faithless members. These unthinking though well-meaning men advocate an interference which not only stops the purifying process, but even increases the vitiation, absolutely encourages the multiplication of the reckless and incompetent by offering them an unfailing provision, and discourages the multiplication of the competent and provident by heightening the difficulty of maintaining a family." The intervention of the government in social affairs, Spencer argued, must distort the necessary adaptation of society to its environment. Once government intervenes, the beneficent processes that would naturally lead to a human's more efficient and more intelligent control over nature will be distorted and give rise to a reverse maleficent process that can only lead to the progressive deterioration of the human race. Thus, the Darwinistic principles of the survival of the fittest is upheld by Herbert Spencer. Peter Dickens says that this idea of social Darwinism and natural selection and the survival of the fittest actually emerged with Herbert Spencer. So, we have got an understanding of Spencer's theory following his evolutionary laws, the distinction between the militant and industrial societies, and his principles of social Darwinism based on the understandings of natural selection and the survival of the fittest. Peter Dickens argues that it was Herbert Spencer who actually gave the first theories of natural selection and survival of the fittest. Anyway, in today's contemporary world, we can see the principles of social Darwinism being very prevalent, and this was particularly true of the COVID pandemic, when those who were unable to make the necessary provisions for survival perished. Thank you.